Good morning, everyone. This is not my favorite way to meet with you, but it will suffice until circumstances change. I'm going to open our session with the territorial acknowledgement. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the Victoria Regional Transit Commission conducts its business on the Tongan traditional territory, homelands of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. With that, I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask for an approval of the agenda. And I would assume Lisa helped, you moved it?
I'll move the agenda, yes.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Someone? Jeff?
Who's that?
All in favor?
Jeff.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is really the only other one that we have on the agenda for approval, and that is the approval of the minutes from our February 25th meeting. So a motion to approve those.
I'll move the minutes. It's Lisa.
Second.
Seconded by
Rob.
Rob. Good. Any errors or omissions? Before I call the question, I'm sure, like everybody, when I look at those minutes, it seems like 4 years ago, not 4 months ago. Our world has changed so much since we met that day, got that information, made those decisions. But it's now an archivable document with a lot changed. With that, I'll call the question. Those in favor of adoption? Opposed? Motion carries. And I did feel, because of the changed circumstances, I did want to just take a moment, and I've just written down a few things which basically are the obvious, but I think for ourselves and for the public who might be following this meeting later, it's important to know the context of this meeting. When the Commission last met on February 25th, 2020, we approved the budget that allowed for expansion of 20,000 hours and 8 new buses. Immediately after that, we deployed a fleet of 12 new CNG fuel buses as part of the low carbon fleet strategy. Then, on March the 16th, 2020, we became aware of COVID-19 and changes immediately impacted transit operations. I want to thank the Commission. I want to thank you all for having responded in sort of real time and via email, helping to make decisions surrounding the eliminating of fares to enable rear door boarding and protect our operators and the public, and the decisions to reduce service levels as business closed their doors. By March the 17th, 2020, the province declared a state of emergency. Transit was declared an essential service, and the public health officer and the province guided BC Transit decisions. On behalf of the Commission, I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister indicating a loss of revenue of $3.4 million a month from the lack of the motor fuel tax and an additional $6 million a month of the revenue from, there's the fare box and the fuel tax. We have not heard back officially yet, but presumably at some point our staff will be advising us of any communications. We have asked and stated our concern, requesting additional mechanisms for federal contribution to our operating costs. The Commission was notified on May the 3rd, May 3rd, 2020, that fare collection and front door boarding would be able to resume on June the 1st. Now we're into the second week of that. Since that time, I've had conversations with the Minister, our provincial Minister, and BC Transit staff about the path to recovery and to rebuild transit. As BC's restart plan allows for business to reopen and activities to begin to resume, we enter a phase of recovery and move into rebuilding our ridership. I want to take a moment on behalf of all of the Commission to thank BC Transit staff and particular operators that keep the buses rolling throughout this pandemic to ensure essential business can be carried out. So there's our bit of history since our last meeting. And Commission members, I want to introduce you to Quinn Cunningham. He's our new student representative. He's a Camosun College student and is a welcome addition to our commission. Kyle, do you want to just say hi to everyone? Quinn, take a moment to just say hi.
Hi everyone, I'm Quinn Cunningham. I'm the external executive at the Camosun College Student Society, and I'm filling in the student representative seat for the UVSS and our other coalition partners.
Quinn, we're very welcome to have, pleased to have you at the table. We have a history of strong student voices around our table, and even as you know, you don't have a formal vote, you certainly are welcome to enter into any discussions and to express your opinions on any decisions that are being contemplated by Transit.
I'm grateful to be here.
Good. So with that, and as you'll see, Commission, we have a series of reports bringing us up to date and putting us in the picture. They're going to be presented by various staff members. I'm going to turn number 4, Pandemic Recovery Strategy Update, to Lisa Trotter now, and we'll have, I think it may be easier to have, if we might make a note, questions after. Let's let Lisa get through her presentation and then we'll follow up with any questions.
Thank you, Chair Bryce. So as Chair Bryce has indicated, we've been through a lot in the past several months, both personally and professionally, as we work our way through COVID. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our response and then recovery and then our path to rebuilding. So here's a little graph that kind of shows the phases that we've been through. The first, of course, being the response phase, when we had an emergency scale down. This meant that many decisions needed to be made very quickly. And in retrospect, maybe some decisions we might have made differently, but things were moving very fluidly and very quickly. And our top of mind for us was the safety of our operators and the safety of the customers aboard transit. Transit was, as Chair Bryce indicated, designated as an essential service. And we began to work very closely with the province and with the public health officer to ensure we could maintain service for those that were trying to get to essential jobs in hospitals and in grocery stores to keep people safe and keep people replenished and stocked as they stayed at home and tried to keep safe. We also recognize that some of those essential workers, transit was their only method to get to those workplaces. And also for a lot of residents around town, transit is their only avenue to be able to get food, medical attention, and other essential services. So it was key that people could rely on transit and that people could feel safe on transit. I certainly appreciate that during that phase, the dedication of the commission members to respond very quickly to any emails and to make decisions to support our transit operators and the service on the road, and also BC Transit and the decisions they needed to make to ensure the safety of our drivers and the public. So emergency planning to meet essential service while keeping our customers and employees safe was that first phase of scale down. And some of the things that we did to make sure that that would happen was we reduced passenger loads by 50%. We started with rear door boarding and no fare collection so that we could stop that transaction between the operator and the public. We moved the red line back in the buses to protect, again, our drivers. We created onboard announcements to remind people of the safety features. We increased bus cleaning, and we installed vinyl barriers on all of our single door buses, provided personal protective equipment for our operators, and increased our cleaning on the on-road operator washrooms. And what that meant, if you guys remember, the messaging was very clear at the time. Folks should stay home unless they had somewhere essential to go. So our ridership definitely felt the impacts of that as people only rode the buses they needed to. And we all followed the provincial health officer in telling us to stay home if we didn't need to go out to get essential things like groceries or pharmaceuticals or get to essential jobs. So this is a graph that shows the average weekday boardings and what happened in terms of ridership. And overall, our ridership was down between 70 and 80% in this time period. Now that was similar across all of North American transit agencies. In some large cities, they were seeing up to a 90% decline in ridership. But still, you know, buses were rolling to get people where they needed to go. You can see by this graph, the ridership was actually down fairly consistently across the Victoria region. You can see I've got the core of the Victoria service, the Peninsula and the West Shore. So it was down the least on the West Shore, 72.2%, and the most on the Peninsula, 77.2%, and the core was down 75.7%. And these graphs on the right-hand side that also show the rapid transit routes, frequent transit routes, local transit high demand, local coverage, and target routes, and where the ridership was down. These statistics were taken on those graphs between week 14 and week 18 this year versus last year, and show, of course, the rapid transit routes, which would be like 15, 50, and 70 were down 79%, and all the rest between 71 and 74. So not a huge amount of difference between all of the transit and the core Victoria in terms of the ridership loss that was incurred. And in correspondence, we had a lot of discussion and very quick action around what we should do with service levels. We had to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be an essential service? How much service needs to be on the road? And then we also needed to consider the capacity on the buses and what impact that may have. So we quickly went into a spring service change where we reduced hours going to schools that weren't in session any longer. The universities, of course, shut down early. And so we did an initial 5% service reduction. The commission was informed upon at the time. And then we quickly went to our summer service early, and that was about another 13% service reduction in hours compared to the previous year at the same time. And again, this was in part to us really looking at where we needed to have service on the road and where it did not make sense anymore, where businesses were indeed not open, and trying to make the right decision with the 50% capacity we can have on roads. And we're going to have to continue to evaluate this very closely as we move forward. We recognize that the business as normal is no longer necessarily the case, and that ridership trends are changing. Folks may come back to work at a staggered schedule at different peak times, and that may actually be good for transit in some ways. And also some businesses may not fully return to their offices, and maybe more remote work. So we are looking at ridership at BC Transit on a daily basis and looking at how those impacts are being felt and what changes we may need to recommend to the Commission going forward as those trends change. So as we went through the emergency scale down, we were working very closely, as I said, with the province of BC. So there was weekly meetings with BC Transit and the Ministry. We also had a BC Transit Emergency Operations Center that was activated. And we had weekly calls with TransLink and also weekly webinars with the Canadian Urban Transit Association to make sure that we were following worldwide industry standards on how the response was for COVID in this time when it came to public transit. Lots of internal communication sent out weekly to local governments and customer updates, education and outreach, and mostly through social and digital media. Certainly when we made changes to the schedules rapidly, it changed our approach to how we could do that work. Printed rider's guides normally take about 12 weeks for us to produce internally. Our scheduling department takes about 12 weeks to produce a schedule. So we were looking to find some ready-made solutions in scheduling and to push things out more of a digital and social media medium rather than print rider's guides. And certainly that's pushed us to look at how we might communicate with our customers more effectively in the future. So luckily now with BC's restart plan, we're starting to look at recovery and look at restarting. So as the society and economy reopen, corresponding transit services will need to increase to accommodate increased travel while maintaining the safety of our customers and our employees. You can see on this screen we have on the left-hand side British Columbia's restart plan, and on the right-hand side BC Transit's response plan. So this kind of goes through the phases of recovery as we anticipated, along with the phases that British Columbia province has put out. In May, of course, essential services and some businesses were open, and that's when we had the reduced transit services, rear door boarding, enhanced cleaning, and some of those things continue on today, especially including the enhanced cleaning put in place. From mid-May onwards, there was restoration of some services under enhanced protocols. So elective surgeries reopened, dentists, chiropractic, more retail restaurants, cafes, and pubs are opening, recreation and sports are starting to open. So there's been a public education campaign, and we're pushing out marketing around wearing face coverings, enhanced cleaning, assignments on the buses, and letting people know what to expect when they ride transit. Sorry guys, just a technical problem here for a second. And making sure through this May to June period that we can stabilize our service levels and monitor demand, while continuing to have enhanced cleaning protocols and installation of driver barriers on all the buses. So while we have vinyl barriers in place right now, we're busy installing plexiglass barriers on our buses across the province. In June to September, it's phase 3. This is when we anticipate schools may come back in September, hotels and universities may start to open. We have been in discussions with businesses around the Victoria region, including UVic, Hermosa College, Royal Roads, Picard Gardens, and many of the businesses to anticipate what their return to work will look like. We recognize that the universities are looking to be more online in September than they have been previously, and certainly that may create impacts to service and ridership. And also we are in the midst of negotiating UPass agreements with those post-secondary institutions that through the summer had an opt-in program. And then phase 4 to be determined when we can reopen large gatherings again. And certainly we all need to consider, as Dr. Connie Henry has stated, that there may be a second wave, and we need to be prepared with scenario planning for that should it occur. Now, in terms of the recovery phase and scaling back up, there was a survey done of riders across Canada all over the state for people to ride a city bus. And one of the things that we took some comfort in was that all of the things that were stated in terms of what people reported back were things that BC Transit has already endeavored to do and will endeavor to continue to do for riders back. So the things that were important, 7% said they were comfortable today, 24% said they wouldn't be comfortable until there's a vaccine. But the important parts here is that cleaning surface regularly, 68% said they needed to see that, and we indeed are doing that at BC Transit. That there was enough room to distance, 63% said that. So currently we're at about 40 to 50% of capacity on the buses, and we may need to find a way to, as we move through recovery, if there's no second wave, that we can get that up to maybe 2/3 capacity with people wearing face coverings and have them feel safe. Reduced number of people on the buses, we certainly do have that, and we are strongly encouraging people to wear face masks or face coverings on transit, and that they trust the organization. So putting that information out and reassuring the public that we are taking their health and safety as our #1 priority, and that it is safe to get on the bus. So as of the recovery phase, as of June 1st, of course, front door boarding and fare collection has started again. Physical capacity increased slightly on the buses, and we'll continue to look at that throughout the summer and into the fall. Customers are encouraged to wear face masks and other controls remain in place. Enhanced cleaning is happening daily on the buses, and every week there's a full disinfection with sprayers, and there's continuous cleaning and standard improvements on the washrooms on the routes. And this just has a little bit of a picture of some of the displays we've been putting out through marketing and putting out in our digital media campaign, telling people to wear masks, telling them about the personal etiquette and at bus stops, pushing out next ride bus capacity information, and really encouraging the same things that Dr. Bonnie Henry has said throughout, that if you have to cough into your sleeve, cover your face, and if you're not feeling well, please do not lie down and stay home. I think in the recovery phase, the next thing that we're really going to have to look towards are some of the same things that our customers have always said were important to them on transit. That it's safe, that it's clean, that it's reliable. We're slowly going to have to start transitioning from essential travel only to your best transportation solution again. That's where we were before this all started, and that's certainly where we want to be as we move forward. Transit is still the answer for all the problems that it solved pre-COVID, and it'll still be the answer after COVID. So it will be the answer for congestion on the roads as cars come back on the street. It'll be the answer for safe and affordable travel for folks, and it's certainly the answer for a greener future. Now this slide just shows some of the things that we have been looking at in transit throughout the COVID period, and that we will be watching going forward. So demand characteristics across different communities will be different. Reopening will have different impacts, different sectors impact ridership, and there's unknown impact on customer behaviors and demand right now. So you can see this graph shows color-coded in all of our tier 1 systems, Victoria being the second one now, where the characteristics usually are for travel. So in Victoria, it's 35% for work, and 22% for college and university, and it shows the middle school, social, recreation, and entertainment. And we're going to have to continue to look at all this, how it changes, and how that might impact how we schedule transit going forward, and how we might see ridership come back as things open back up. So if Victoria is primarily work and half the workforce stays remote, that's certainly going to have a bigger impact than say it would in Comox on the screen, where only 20% of people are using it for work versus 35. So these are some of the things that we'll continue to look at to help make decisions and to help give best advice to the commission going forward. In terms of the plan that we've submitted to the province, we were required, as all businesses were, to submit a plan to the province and to WorkSafe BC as to what our plans were to keep people safe and secure as they return into our workplace, and also as we get people back on our buses. In terms of ridership demand, we assume that there's a partial workplace return through the summer with gradual increases to non-essential trips, and the school returning at least for K-12 in September, and at universities partially in person and partially online. And the ridership demand we expect in June to August to be between 30 and 50% of previous ridership demand. And then we're hoping for an increase to 40 to 60% in September to December. We recognize that this isn't going to be a clear path forward, that it may be more of a path forward and a step back as we see what happens with the businesses in the area, as we see how people return to everyday life post-COVID, and as we see whether or not there is a second wave. In terms of service hours, we talked about the service reductions that we made for the spring and summer, and we're hoping in September it's going to be more of a 90 to 100% of the service hours on the road. It just may look a little different in the past. What we're really trying to do to make sure that we've thoughtfully planned out service is we're trying to make sure that we have scheduled service on the road, pushed out by next ride to all the places that we know need it in September, but it's the unknown factor that we want to build in some contingency for. So we have a little bit of dynamic scheduling happening in terms of us having extra hours reserved for our general manager to use to dispatch buses on demand as we see places open that we didn't anticipate when we put the schedule together for September. Those schedules are pretty much ready to go, and certainly we could see businesses open in October, November, or December as we're still not scheduled, and we want to be able to react quickly to put service on the road where it's needed, so we have built that in for our fall schedule. Capacity increases will be gradual. I mean, we need to slowly and surely make sure that people feel safe and that we can manage what's happening on the road and not see any increases in illness or concern. So we're watching what's happening with capacity on the buses now, but we gradually anticipate it will increase to 2/3 capacity by the September period. Our counterparts at TransLink are already at 2/3 capacity in their bus system. We wanted to take a more measured approach and make sure that we could manage the capacity on the bus with the service levels that we have on the road today. On revenue, we've resumed fare collection as of June 1st. The revenue will reflect our ridership demand, and we're hoping to get that between the summer up to 30 to 50% of previous revenue, and by September, 40 to 60%. My understanding of conversations with our finance team is we're, as of the beginning of June till the 16th, we're about 25 to 30% of our normal revenue. So we're hoping to continue to grow that as people start to get back out to their regular lives. And I think for long-term sustainability, we need to position BC Transit for long-term success and ensure financial stability and support for economic recovery in our communities. As Chair Bryce mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we're keenly aware that there was a huge loss in revenue during this COVID time due to our lack of ability to collect fares, since safety was our first priority, and also due to a lack of motor fuel tax as cars stay parked in driveways. So we're certainly going to need to find a way to address that shortfall for long-term financial stability. Going forward, we think the path for that is to make sure that we are a safer, more reliable transportation service for our customers. So having buses available when people need them and continuing to push messages out to our customers though that the bus is their safest transportation solution, a more sustainable solution for the communities, a more productive and collaborative environment working with our local governments to get that messaging. In our rebuild phase, we certainly do need to look at our short-term funding challenges. The fare box revenue and ridership decline, the gas tax revenue and reduced travel. We've also had, for personal protective equipment, additional cleaning costs has certainly been a cost that we're tracking that was not anticipated for this year. And BC Transit's been working very closely with the province and the federal government advocating for support. We've been reviewing all the additional cleaning and PPE requirements and the costs. We've looked at accessing availability to use reserves for short-term funding challenges and to ensure that we have balance sheet strength and liquidity for the company going forward. In the rebuild phase, we're also working with the province to analyze revenues, expenditures, capital and debt, and develop options for consideration from the province. Solutions are expected to be a partnership between local governments, BC Transit, and the province. It's still very early in the pandemic response and recovery phases, and many factors may affect BC Transit's operations and finances going forward. Again, we don't know if there'll be a second wave. We expect that we do need to keep a lot of these cleaning and safety procedures in place for the long term. So we're going to have to look at what impacts that has. And you certainly will get a chance to see where we were at year end in terms of the financial reporting further in the presentation, and then we'll have a further discussion about our long-term goals when it becomes more clear where we're going to be landing. Staff is still working on that Q1 presentation to look at what the full impacts have been. So I think next steps is focus on rebuilding ridership. That's certainly where we need to go from here. Rebuilding ridership will also rebuild that revenue store. Evaluating any emerging trends in ridership patterns, as I indicated. Scenario planning for service if there should be a potential second wave of COVID. Our planning department has been working tirelessly, as have our schedulers throughout this entire time, doing several scenarios that we could quickly pull together if we needed to move on a new transit schedule should that happen. I would say we're much better prepared now for a second wave than we were when this all hit and we were having to make things up as we went along. So again, we appreciate all the patience of the commission members as we were quickly putting information out to you and looking for really quick decisions. Continuing to plan for capital investments and infrastructure. I mean, I think that there's going to be a time when We want to stimulate growth and economy throughout the region, and we want to have shovel-ready projects still ready to go. For when that ridership comes back, I don't think we can take our foot off the gas on some of those capital investments that Levi Timmermans will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Plan implementation of deferred expansion. So the expansion that we did have planned for this September of 8 buses and 20,000 hours was deferred. I think it's prudent for us to take a real look at where we're at today and plan that expansion with a little bit more time and conscious effort into where that expansion may or may not be needed further down the road. With ridership being in decline of 70 to 80%, it didn't make sense to put more service on the road right now. So we'll plan for that future deferred expansion and then future planning. We were already well in this process of looking at a 10-year vision for transit in the Victoria region and also looking at rapid bus implementation. And those are still clear goals that the Commission has had. We just might have to hit the reset button on where the starting point is for those plans and how we build them out for the future. So I think with that, I finished with the pandemic recovery, and we'll maybe pause and turn it back over to Chair Price for any questions, and then we move forward.
Thanks, Lisa, for that. Tina, has anyone come on the screen looking to make a comment or question?
I haven't seen anything in the chat.
So if Rob,
go ahead.
Thank you. So one just real quick question. Lisa, in one of your slides, you talked about that pre-COVID, 12% of the riders were using BC Transit for medical and dental appointments. So that's basically one. Did you not? You're looking at me like that's not true. Maybe I'm
Demographic slide. Demographic slide.
yes.
Susan, can you turn off your microphone because it's echoing when people are talking there?
So so I'm sorry. I'm looking at Victoria, Lisa, and I'm looking right at the end, at red.
Oh yes, okay. I see where you are there.
So am I correct? 12%? Am I not right?
Through the chair, that would be 12% for medical and dental.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess my question is, one of the messaging that we have right now is if you're not feeling well, don't take BC Transit. But it's 1 in 9, and I understand that some of this is, day-to-day stuff like going to a dental appointment. But how do we reconcile those two, and what is our messaging for people who are not feeling well but need to get to their doctor? Stay off transit?
Yes, certainly through the chair, Mayor Martin, we are recommending if people do not feel well that they stay home and they do not take transit. My assumption would be, and we would certainly encourage people to continue to take it to their regular doctor's appointment if they have regular things that they're getting looked after, like checkups and going to dental appointments, or if you have a broken finger. For sure, those are reasons why people might use transit. But if you have any symptoms that of a cold or you're not feeling well, we would echo exactly what our provincial health officer said. If you're not well, stay home.
Okay. I guess the only reason I bring it up is it just becomes a very sort of contradictory message that we've got out there, and just wanting to make sure that we're still encouraging people to use transit to go to their appointments and do their medical things. And so I just would want us to be careful that we're not discouraging, especially I think of, for example, my own mom, who would be like, well, no, I'm not supposed to be on transit because I'm supposed to go see my doctor. So just making sure that we get both messages in there. And I'm done. Thank you.
A good point, Rob. And I think what we've all learned throughout this whole thing is the clarity of message. And that's why Dr. Bonnie has been so effective, because her repetition of her message. So good reminder for us. And Lisa, let's make sure that, particularly around that appointment thing, that if we have a chance to re-emphasize that you're not well, you're not on the bus. Yeah. Are there others, Tina, indicating they wish to speak? On the chat, we don't, but who would like to? Anyone? If not,
Kevin.
then we'll thank Lisa.
No.
Pardon? Oh, Kevin, go ahead. Yeah, Kevin.
Thank you, Susan. Susan, your microphone is back on again, and there's quite an echo in that room when they're both on. That's just, we can hear you fine through Lisa's microphone. It sounds good. I guess a couple of questions. One, that the nadir of the ridership around 77% down. Where are we now? Like at the beginning of June, where are our ridership numbers looking at the moment?
Christine, you're gonna take that or Lisa?
We're about, this week, we are showing that we're back up to about 33%.
So that we're just down 33% from normal ridership at this point?
We're down about 67%, 66%. So we've got about 33 or 34% of our ridership.
Okay. So quite a
It's been, yeah, but we went quite low during the height of the pandemic. We were dropping almost down to about a loss of 80% of our ridership. So we are seeing a very gradual recovery.
Okay, thank you. And can you remind me on the budgeting questions of things going forward? The province pays a portion of our cost. Do they base that on a percentage of the budget that we put forward, or do they put it forward on the percentage of the of revenue or some other piece that's out of our control?
It's the percentage of our operating budget.
Okay, so they have to approve the operating budget like we do, and they pay that percentage. Okay, thank you. And then just has there been any analysis, because obviously there's a large portion of people who are still uncomfortable riding public transit. Have we done any analysis of sort of the cost of putting in more barriers, like barriers between seats, versus the revenue loss that we might be facing from having to say keep every other seat open?
Well, we're definitely very much in contact with other transit agencies around North America. We've also been watching what other agencies worldwide have been doing, and certainly I don't think that we've looked at plexiglass between the seats. I think that would be logistically and operationally challenging. TransLink took the approach of actually blocking off certain seats. Now they are starting to pull back on that. I think that we have probably exhausted the mechanisms that we have for physical distancing on the bus right now, and the key messaging now is to follow the advice of the provincial health officer, which is don't use transit if you're sick and showing any symptoms. And when you use transit, please use a face covering. And I think that you saw yesterday, TransLink came out with quite a large campaign messaging the same. This morning I heard a federal campaign messaging the same. So I think that really what we're starting to see now in society is that in situations where we are unable to provide that physical distancing, people are starting to strongly encourage to provide bring a mask or face covering when they use these types of services, and I think it's becoming more and more prevalent.
No, that's great. Thank you. The other sort of question I have, really two-part. One, I'm just looking at where we've lost. So there's 22% of our ridership is college and university, and I appreciate there's some going back, but that's what, 25,000 or so UVic students and 20,000 approximately Camosun students, almost all of them being kept off campus except where they have to be on campus. And that is probably largely gone. I'm curious whether or not UPass has gone completely in this year or not. And there's 24% saying they need a vaccine, so that's gone. And then, we're going to have a significant portion of the work as people work from home and pieces. So is there any sort of sense, even in September, there's some wording in here that sounds like sort of back to normal almost in the fall, but that's clearly not the case if the universities are down and we're still working from home. So what are we actually realistically looking at in terms of ridership, and more importantly, or just as importantly, I guess, revenue, and how does that, that's the big question I have, is how do we make up that lost revenue?
So the UPass is something that we are in negotiation with our institutions as we speak. Those discussions started in earnest last week, and I think that we'll have a much better understanding of where it is that they sit on the UPass in the next month. There's certainly obviously going to be people who are not using their transit, those students to get to and from campus to go to classes, but a lot of those individuals still use transit heavily to access other services in the communities. And so we are working with our post-secondary institutions to highlight that and stress it. I think that there are still, I think that there's still a strong potential that we could get some UPass revenue coming in, albeit it may be different than our existing agreement. So we are going to have to be a bit creative and innovative with how we approach this, especially recognizing that some students may not be coming back into town. But for those who actually are physically in the community, there are some options that we're looking at in terms of ways that we can still provide them with a pass and get that revenue. In terms of our ridership, I think that we are looking at a more conservative 40 to 60% ridership growth, like a total maybe 60, 65% by the fall. And we are being more conservative with regards to, you know, it would be wonderful if we could just see ourselves snap right back to what we were like pre-COVID, or get back up to an 80% level towards the end of the fall. But we really just don't know if that's going to be able to take place. I think that we have to monitor very closely what the new mobility habits are going to be of people. We're seeing a lot of workplaces not come back as quickly, and potentially permanently change some of their working environments with people staying at home. So it's something that we are analyzing very closely as these things are emerging. So I think that from a forecasting perspective, we are saying conservatively 40 to 60% ridership for between now and the fall. But we are preparing ourselves operationally should those numbers go higher.
So can you give us any sense of what that looks like from a financial risk perspective? I mean, we've got a budget that we approved last meeting, and that sort of almost business as usual piece. You know, what are where are we looking at here from our risk perspective in terms of our finances this year?
So I think that you're going to get a much more fulsome look at that when we go in camera. So perhaps we could just reserve some of those comments for when we get to the financial presentations.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Are there other members of the commission who wish to ask questions or make comments at this point? If I don't see any indication, I'm going to assume that we'll receive information, and perhaps if I could prevail upon Lisa, if it helps, would you make the motion and Fred second it?
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
And we'll call the question. Those in favor? Anyone opposed? No one opposed. The motion carries. The next, moved it by the next item, financial and performance reporting summary, and we're going to have Roland come online with this. Is he on deck to come on? Welcome.
Is it Megan? Actually, I'm going to do it.
That's Megan.
I'm going to do it.
So it's going to be Megan. Good.
Yeah.
Hi, Megan. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to let this presentation go to somebody else.
No, you're going to tell us about the good old days up till March 31st.
That felt too sad.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So this is the financial performance report for the year ending March 31st, which, as you said, feels almost like a year ago, but it was 2.5 months ago. So this is what we normally do, and it's nice to do something normal. So I'm sure you've all read through it. So what I want to do is just touch on a few things that are different from normal. And so, Tina, are you managing the slide deck?
I've got it, Megan. Lisa?
Lisa? Okay, so I might just ask you, when I ask you to flip the slide, that would be great.
Certainly.
Thank you. There is one major point that we will talk to later on in the deck, and that's the the operating reserves and what happened as of March 31st, upon instruction from the ministry that it be drawn down, and that effective April 1st, that we would no longer have an operating reserve for the Victoria Regional Transit System. And I'll walk through that when we get to that slide. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I'm just going to touch on a few of the categories and focus more on the impact of COVID. Things were tracking normally as they were in Q3. Revenues were up, passengers were up, costs were down, etc. So if we could scroll down to the next slide. Yeah, so for the year ending in March, our passenger revenues were above budget, the 274,000, and that had been tracking probably about 1.5% above budget. And then as of when we stopped collecting fares, of course, in mid-March, we estimated that there was some passenger revenue loss of around $460,000. So that would have been more around 700 without that. Advertising revenue was basically not impacted. And then, of course, passenger trips were impacted significantly in that last 12 days of March. Although we did come in but almost on budget, we estimated that we lost around 675,000 passengers. Thank you. The one piece on, well, two pieces on this one is we were above budget on fuel tax revenue, 61,000, so that was good. And due to the instruction to collapse the operating reserve, due to the fact that the province chose to utilize on a one-time basis 4.3 million of the shared reserve, their budgeted provincial operating contributions was lower than budget, and the use of reserves was higher than budget by that 4.3 million. Keep going, thank you. The thing to note here is operations, we were almost on budget. Fuel, we were below budget, 1.5 million. Primarily due to fuel pricing, we ended up at $1.13 versus $1.27, a bit of volume variance as well. And at the end of the day, service hours were 14,000 hours below budget. A significant chunk of that was from the Handy Dart side from that last 2 weeks in March, and a bit of a reduction for the conventional service, around 5,000 hours for conventional. Next slide, please. There's not much new here. We were pretty much on budget overall. We were tracking this way at Q3, a bit more on the facility side as we had to find more warehouse space and some leasing costs were higher. And administration, it came in below budget. There was lower consulting, marketing, and significant lower labor benefit costs. And that's all for that slide. And lease fees were below budget, just primarily due to timing and higher federal funding credits. Okay, slide. Okay, so we'll just pause here for a moment. In the last presentation, there was an operating reserve fund with a projected balance at year end of around $12 million, which would have been the 15.8 less the 6, plus whatever the variance was between actuals and budget. And then we received notification that the province was going to use 4.289 additional amount in 1920 of that shared reserve. And that meant that the local share of 8,147 needed to be transferred back to the transit fund as they were using a portion and collapsing it at the same time. Now, I I'm happy just to pause here for a moment and if there's any questions on that. There was no negative financial impact to the commission. The short story is it's a good news story in a way that we're actually moving the local share of that fund back into the transit fund, where the commission has sort of total control over how they use those funds. So there's now just one fund. It's called the transit fund. We've gone back to our pre-2015 ways of dealing with any differences between budget and actual. Yeah.
Susan, may I ask a question?
We see if there's questions here. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, can you remind us what the transit fund specs are? Do we have discretion, but what can it be used for and what can't it be used for?
The transit fund, did you say?
Yes.
Yes, it can be used any way the commission wants to fund the commission share of expenses. It isn't segregated between operating costs or lease capital costs or anything like that. The
Okay,
only
thank
thing,
you.
yeah, the only thing at this point is that a few years ago, the commission did approve a policy requiring that 2.5% of the operating cost budget sort of be held in reserve, so to speak, and the rest could be used at the commission's discretion.
Okay, and then also, can you remind us how the transit fund is built over time?
Sure, it would normally be built by more passenger revenues than budgeted and by savings from budget, from
Okay,
operating expenses. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Susan.
Are there other members of the commission who have questions at this point? Doesn't appear so. Megan, is there?
Sorry, just raising my physical hand. It's okay. One just kind of little funny thing I thought I'd point out, the under the revenue and passenger trips, it says figures in thousands except ratios, but we have in there the average fare. So if we actually use the literal term of that would say the average fare was 1,055. Nothing to worry about, obviously. I think it's pretty clear. Can I just ask, just to remind me why the province took out that $4.3 million? Because I was trying to scratch my head and remember the conversation about the logic of taking it out. And I guess the ancillary to that, is there any chance that we could, in this year of extraordinary revenue drops, ask for maybe they could use as a logical way of asking for some money back from the province, separate from the regional formula?
Well, I think probably we should talk about that later on in the meeting, about options.
Okay, fair enough.
For it, yeah.
Yep.
And I'll note the comment on the average fare. So I just have one more slide. It's almost as exciting, but it just highlights it's your transit fund, and I just wanted to point out primarily that you'll see the movement of that local share of the 8147 being moved into your transit fund, and the ending balance at 15.763 for the year end. So that was all I wanted to highlight for this presentation. And again, if there's any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Megan. Any questions, comments? I don't see anyone else.
Susan.
Yes, come.
And this might be also directed to later in the meeting when we go in camera to talk about budget, but this ending balance here, how much of that would, in the current fiscal that we're in with COVID, what's our current revenue shortfall compared to the money that's in the transit fund?
Yeah, that we'll be addressing that in the later session.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else up on the chat line again?
Nothing in the chat.
And all we have at this point to do is to receive this as historical information now. Motion to receive. Lisa helps, be prepared to.
Yes, happy to move receipt.
Thanks, Fred. Would you second that?
Second that, yes, thank you.
Comments? Those in favor? Is there anyone opposed? Not, we'll consider that to be passed. Operations update. Kevin's going to come in for this. Kevin, are you on the line?
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yes, so happy to present the operations update. It's been a very interesting time period for operations, and I would say transit as an industry, and in identifying methods to become nimble in response to fluctuating demands and capacity, etc. I'll just give you a brief update, first of all, on what it looked like prior to. As you know, in the fall, we faced some challenges with vehicle availability, and we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about 99.4%, if I recall. Going into December, we were approximately 99.7% of service delivered. So in the winter, if I exclude the significant freezing temperatures that occurred in, I think, the third week of January and the impact of COVID going into March, we were starting to achieve approximately 99.6% service reliability. There was a lot of effort going into bringing that up to a higher number. As you know, it's been a focus from both a customer perspective, but I want you to know that operationally, we are very committed to a very high level of service reliability. As much as this is a high number, I still think we are able to push that higher. So it's a significant focus. Of course, then came the pandemic, and we then went into the challenges of operator availability. At the very beginning of this, naturally, there was a lot of anxiety related to it. And I want to also acknowledge again a big thank you to the Commission. Under these circumstances, quick operational decisions were required to maintain a level of service reliability. And I want to thank you for that, because I'm on regular communications with colleagues from across the country, and I know the impact to services where that kind of collaboration and support was not in existence. So that made all the difference in us being one of the ones that were, for the most part, ahead of the game in responding to, for example, rear door boarding, the absence of fare collection, as well as other measures we took to protect both customers and our operators. So I thank you for that, and I can't imagine the predicament you're in as far as the Commission with losing that revenue, but I do want to assure you that we are doing everything we can to be efficient and nimble in response to this. The summer level of service went in on May 25th, and that was basically almost an equivalent of a Saturday enhanced level of service. We've had a great ability to respond to different levels of demand. So we're just monitoring and being more responsive rather than putting vehicles on the road unnecessarily. We're able to sort of monitor where pass-ups are occurring, where capacity challenges are occurring, and put service on the road in response to demand as opposed to ahead of the demand. And that's very much what we're preparing for the fall service as well. I would like to also highlight that we were among the very first in Canada to reintroduce the collection of fares and front door loading. I think we've taken great measures in collaboration with our union to make our operators feel very comfortable in that environment. And so far, we've had an excellent response. I will touch first on the customer service info before I go into custom transit. You can see one thing that I would like to highlight in our trends for customer info. We did see an increase in complaints year over year, and you can see that virtually all comes from service levels and from pass ups. So not unexpected based on some of the challenges we were facing earlier on, but something that we are addressing and have had some great success through the summer schedule, and we're preparing very much to have that same strategy in place for the fall. Looking at custom transit, one thing just sort of point out, while the service levels have been somewhat maintained, we've certainly seen a drop in demand, particularly into April. One thing I want to point out, and it came up as part of our ATAC conversations as well, that we've relied heavily on supplementing services through taxi supplement. And that has allowed for a significant increase year over year in what we've been able to accommodate same day requests and the reduction of unmet trips from where we were last year. But I do want to highlight that, we're getting to a point where we're maxing out the capacity of local taxi services. So we know that that bar is somewhere in that 7 to 9% range where we really stretch their resources. So that was something that was identified, and we are working on solutions to address that.
I'm just going to interrupt just for 2 seconds if I could. Just for Quinn's benefit, custom transit services, Quinn, is HandyDart. So you understand what Kevin is referring to here. Sorry for that, Kevin, thanks.
No, thank you for that clarification. So yeah, custom transit is anything that's for somebody with mobility, and that includes HandyDart and a taxi supplement program that a registered HandyDart user may use, or the operator may use to provide a trip. So that completes my report. I'm happy to address any questions you might have, and hopefully the rest was covered within the report itself.
Good. Is anyone on the list there, Tina? Virtual raised hands. Also, I'll go to all the commission members who wish to ask a question at this point. Please just move that down. If not, Kevin, I want to. Good. Go ahead.
Hi there. Hi, Kevin. I'm not certain if this is the appropriate time to bring it up, but in terms for reliability, I did hear some concerns from our partners at the UVSS that the number 12 route was of concern in their membership for reliability. And I'm wondering just on the operations end if you guys have kind of heard similar complaints.
I can't say I personally have, Quinn, but I'd be happy to address that with you if you want to send me an email. Matter of fact, I would like to connect with you on another matter as well. So maybe we can connect offline.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Quinn. And if there are no further questions, motion to receive. Lisa?
Moved.
Second.
Fred, thanks.
Second.
This makes, as we know, to have two people prepared to do that. Any discussion? Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. And Kevin, before you take off, our thanks, particularly to the folks down there at the operation level throughout all of this. We are very, very grateful.
And I do want to again recognize, if I may, the drivers have been outstanding through this. I think we've all experienced various levels of anxiety. I can't speak enough about the professionalism our drivers have through this. So thank you very much for recognizing that.
Oh, I know that any opportunity I get on an interview or tweeting or whatever, I always try to thank our drivers. And I know I speak for everyone on this commission that any communication that you have, ability to communicate directly with them, please tell them their professionalism is much appreciated. So we'll move then to rapid bus number 7. And Matt, are you on deck?
I'm here. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to give a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Great. So it looks like the presentation is just getting loaded. So while it's doing that, it looks like it's in note form. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you, team in the boardroom, for supporting that. So rapid bus implementation strategy. So this is just a very, very brief information update with regards to this project. It's still very, very fresh, but wanted to provide the commission with a progress update and some of the key timelines that we're targeting over the next few months with regards to completion. So you just want to go to the next slide. And while we're transitioning to the next slide, is it just some background on this project? So we've been hearing from the commission members, we've been hearing from our local government partners, we've been hearing from province, we've been hearing from members of the public with regards to when do we graduate to the next step with regards to our transit system and implement a dedicated rapid bus type route. I think we've identified it in many of our plans, our own plans, I know local government plans as well. And what we needed to do was really put together and create a unifying story with regards to creating an action plan with regards to implementing the rapid bus service. So the purpose of today is just provide a brief project overview, a progress update, and also the next steps moving forward so you can be prepared as to what to expect. So if you go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so what is the purpose of this project? As I mentioned before, we want to create a unifying action plan for the implementation of a rapid bus type system. And when I say unifying, what I really mean is that we have pieces of this project all over our organization, as well as all over our local government partners' plans, and also provincial plans and just interests from customers. And what we've seen over the past few years is that when we introduce transit priority measures such as bus lanes, it yields a lot of benefits for our riders, which again yields increases in ridership. Now, I recognize the COVID-19 pandemic has had a definite impact with regards to our ridership across the region. But that doesn't mean we should stop projects like this. I think it's even more important that we continue along with these projects because, as Lisa alluded to in her previous presentation, that the problems that transit solves will exist long after the pandemic is over. So we want to make sure that we're prepared to again transition to that, to continue to fight climate change and congestion, social isolation, and affordability. Also, we want to support the VRTC goal. So this rapid bus again was deemed as a priority based on those workshops that we held over the last year. We want to align with community aspirations and OCPs and other plans. So we know from reading and reviewing OCPs across the region that transit is a priority. So we want to find mechanisms with regards to drive that. Then finally, just as an information, is that we've hired Urban Systems to support this project. So they've been working now for a couple months in the analysis and review to support the work on this project. So what is a rapid bus service? Someone asked me this question the other day. What is rapid bus? And I think I got into planner speak, and it's amazing how you think you know something so well, but can you summarize it in a sentence? And really what rapid bus service is it's faster, more frequent, and more reliable transit service. When we say faster, it means there's more bus lanes and there's more priority for transit. When we say more frequent, we mean a transit service that has higher frequency than other services. When we say more reliable, we know that when a customer gets to that bus stop, they know exactly when that bus is going to arrive. And they have the tools with regards to support that. So if you go to the next slide. So what that means is the core features of a rapid bus include branding. So it stands out. So when you're waiting at a bus stop and you see that bus that's painted a certain color, you know that that bus is going to be faster, frequent, and more reliable. It's also based on the service design. So when a customer gets to the stop, they know that if they just miss one rapid bus, that they know that, hey, that rapid bus is every 10 minutes. I know that. So that means I have to wait no longer than 9 minutes for the next one. There's going to be bus lanes and lots of transit priority. There's vehicles. The vehicles are usually special with regards to what are delivered on a rapid bus. So for example, for the Victoria region for implementation, it might be a service that's always double deckers no matter what. There's also mechanisms with regards to fare collection and onboarding and offloading people to again move people on and off the bus faster, which makes the service more reliable. Stations. So instead of bus stops, we start referring to these locations where people get on the bus as stations. And they're multimodal stations as well, in the sense that we want people to be able to use all different types of transit service with regards to the mobility environment. So you'll notice that this graphic, it's just black and white right now. And that's really where we are in the stage of this process. But I think once we get to the later stages of this process in late fall, we'll be able to come back and this image will be much more colorful in the sense that we'll have all the details filled. The other thing that's absent from this image, you'll notice, is just the land use surrounding it. So there are no images with regards to buildings or housing. And that's also a very, very fundamental part of this project, is that for rapid bus and transit service to succeed, we need the support of our local government partners with regards to land use decisions to support transit ridership. So again, this image is symbolic of the sense of where we are in the project with regards to the black and white sort of imagery, and hopefully by the end of it, we'll be able to fill it out with the colors and what we need to do to actually turn it into action. Next slide. So as far as the project scope, and my apologies if you can't read this map in detail, but I'll explain it. So the project scope is we are looking at specific corridors for the rapid bus implementation. So those specific corridors are between downtown and uptown, between uptown and the West Shore, between uptown and UVic, and uptown to the Saanich Peninsula. So those corridors were selected strategically in the sense that that's where we currently have existing high frequency, high demand services. And further, those have also been identified as future rapid bus corridors within our own transit future plans. I should note, though, that because other corridors aren't included in this review, doesn't mean that we can't someday implement rapid bus services in those regions. So one of the goals of this project is to help with regards to identifying the priority corridors, but to also provide a toolkit with regards to implementation. So if and when another corridor at some point in the future designates, hey, we want to do rapid bus down that corridor, it's justified, it makes sense, then we have that toolkit in place and we can essentially copy paste that format into the different corridor. So I just want to note that while our review for this project is limited to those corridors, that will not restrict us from implementing rapid bus in other corridors if and when that is required. So go to the next slide. So the deliverables for this work is that we essentially want to come up with an overarching service design and brand identity. So branding is very, very critical in these projects, and Urban Systems has provided some great guidance with regards to this, and based on our research with other transit agencies across North America, is branding is everything in the sense that a customer knows when they see it, they know what they're getting with regards to the experience that they're going to receive. The other key thing is that we want to make sure there's alignment and integration of BC Transit, provincial, regional, and municipal plans. So we know that there's lots of transportation plans out there from local government partners, and we want to review those and make sure that anything that we're proposing and delivering aligns with those plans. Likewise, from a regional perspective, the CRD has some ambitious goals, so we want to make sure we're in alignment with that. And finally, with the provincial, so they have their South Vancouver Island Mobility Plan, which will be hopefully released in the coming months. We want to make sure there's alignment with that as well with regards to our action strategy. The other point is capacity transitions and to support future scalability. So what this means is something that we've heard so far from talking with local government staff is that, hey, rapid bus is a great idea, we love it. However, what happens when we need to go next? What happens next? So let's just say the rapid bus is an overwhelming success along Douglas Street, and at some point you need to say, well, we need to find a more efficient and more effective way of moving these people because so many people are demanding the transit services. So as part of that, Urban Systems is going to support us with just sort of designating what are the trigger points with regards to when do you upgrade from a rapid bus to a BRT to an LRT to even beyond that. And essentially, what are the land use implications? What are the density requirements? And essentially what we want to do is we want to make sure that any action that we take over the next couple of years with regards to rapid bus does not limit us from any future decisions that we may need to make along those corridors. So again, we're not looking at transit as individual pieces, we're looking at it as an evolution. So hopefully this document will also help facilitate that conversation with regards to that classic question that we always receive, which is, when are we going to get trains along this corridor? The other thing is we want to make sure there's partnerships. So partnerships is a big part of this region, especially around funding. So are there partnership opportunities in the next little while with regards to getting this implemented sooner rather than later? Corridor review and opportunities, I mentioned that. So we're focusing on those primary corridors, and we want to essentially summarize what are the top priorities with regards to investments that we can make to make transit the best solution along those corridors. And then finally, just the launch strategy and a rapid bus toolkit. So planning is easy, launching is much more difficult. So this document will help facilitate that and provide that action list with regards to what do we need to do to get across the finish line to get a rapid bus service up and running in the Victoria region. And I should note too that incrementalism is our friend. Sometimes it's starting with steps along the way, and I think that that brand identity is a key step that we'll be hoping to launch, sooner rather than later. And then finally, that rapid bus toolkit, as I mentioned previously, that is essentially a toolkit that we can apply anywhere else in the region if and when a rapid bus is required. So as the region changes, demand evolves, demand changes. If we deem that a rapid bus is required along a specific corridor, then we don't necessarily need to do a deep dive in that corridor because we have that toolkit already prepared to support the implementation. Go to the next slide. So a timeline. So for the past couple of months, we've been doing research analysis, and we've had some very, very early meetings with local government staff. For summer 2020, so after this meeting over the next couple of months, we're going to be doing some more targeted engagement with additional staff. and regional staff across the region. And that could include presentations to councils across the region if that is something that you're interested in. So we will be working with staff, and if they direct that would support the project, then we're happy to attend those discussions. And our goal is to have this completed by fall 2020. So by the commission meeting in the fall, we hope to have a close to finished product to share with the group today. And then finally, as far as implementation, when can we officially launch this service? That is to be determined. But again, as part of this plan, hopefully we can develop a roadmap with regards to the next steps and some more concrete dates as to when this can be launched. So the next steps, as I described, it's targeted key stakeholder engagement. So don't be surprised if we are reaching out to your staff and showing up at councils across the region to, again, gain support for this project, because it really needs to be a unified approach. I'll say this, that BC Transit can't do these projects alone. We need the support of the local government partners. And then again, the final plan will be delivered it is based on the timeline for the fall of 2020. So that closes the presentation, and thank you for who's ever going from slide to slide, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's very positive to have sort of our vision going forward. So currently dragged down by today's issues that it is good to remind ourselves that there's tremendous things happening and coming in the future. Just before I go to others, I will ask, when you say you're going to be meeting with local municipal staffs, presumably all staffs, not just the staffs of the commission members, I'm wondering, Commission, perhaps we should, as a commission, send out a letter to the mayors from all of the region, just a statement saying that we have these plans. It's going to involve everybody in the region. As transit approaches your staff, we hope you'll support it. I think it's good for us to have this information, but since it also involves Central Sandwich and Esquimalt and Huron and so on, that it would be good for us as a commission to reach out to our counterparts in those municipalities. So I think after this, I will prepare something to pick up the essence of Matt's presentation and to share it with our brother. Have we got questions or comments from members of the commission? Anyone on the line there? Yeah.
Susan, I've got a couple questions.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks for the report. It's exciting to see this work moving ahead. I have an overarching question and then some more detailed ones. Could you explain for us, or for me maybe, what's the difference between rapid bus and BRT?
A great question. I think that a rapid bus would be, and again, there is no, I think, I'll be honest with you, as part of this work, and this has come up before, is with regards to definitions, that urban systems will be providing some guidance through research across North America in those definitions with regards to what is the appropriate name for this service. We've used the word rapid bus because it's nomenclature that is used at TransLink, and there's a familiarity with it. It's also similar that we do have a rapid bus service in the Okanagan between Kelowna and West Kelowna, so it is part of our common language. But I would see that, you know, the key transitions for rapid bus is that with regards to the stop locations is something that, again, based on transit agencies across the world, is that a rapid bus service that we have in the Okanagan has those stations that are still on the end of the curb, so on the sidewalk side. Whereas there are some rapid bus stations or rapid bus or BR type services where they actually run down the middle of the street. You actually have your stations sort of in the center platform. So that might be a distinguishing criteria with regards to the difference between a rapid bus and our BRT. But as far as our research, I think that that's going to be something that we can clearly define with regards to the project itself.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, to me, I think what we want to move towards as a region is BRT, but that, for me, that doesn't, like, I don't care where the stops go. It doesn't matter if they're in the middle of the street or the side of the street. It's it's the frequency and the design of the network. So it'll be good to get that clarified through the system or the urban systems work. And then my second question, and this is the Transit Commission passed a motion on this a good 2 or 3 years ago now, is to develop a business case for BRT or rapid bus. So I have two questions. One is, I didn't see business case as one of the deliverables, like how much will this cost? And then the second is, how does this work play into the 25-year, I wrote it down here, the facilities master plan? Because presumably for rapid bus, we need some facilities that we don't currently have. So yeah, my hope is that when the urban systems is done, we have a total cost, and we can say to the province and the federal government and ourselves, this is what it's going to cost to do rapid transit. Here's our project cost. So can you talk about those things a little bit?
Yes, Lisa, through the chair. Yeah, the intention for this report is to include some costs with regards to implementation. So that will be part of the scope. The second question with regards to the impacts to capital projects and facilities. Yes, so Levi Timmermans, the director, has been heavily involved. We're sort of co-owning this project. So that is going to be a big discussion point, because it's one part of it is obviously service, but an even more important part with regards to this project is just the infrastructure that's required to support it, whether that's stations or whether it's a third facility at some point in the Victoria Regional Transit System to support new buses. And I'll note too that that's also something that has come up from local government discussions so far, is just the real importance with regards to infrastructure, because just noting that BC Transit we don't usually own the curbside stops. So again, we need the support of local government partners with regards to building some of those stations in the future.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, and I'll look forward to the fall. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Comments? Not? Somebody up there? Just checking on you to see if you've please. So thanks very much, Matt. As I say, it's psychologically very helpful for us at this point to be talking about positive future projects. So we look forward to the next phases. Perhaps with your concurrence, Lisa and Fred, I'll let you move second.
You got it.
Okay.
Second.
Anyone opposed? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks very much. Next up is Levi. Are you there, Levi?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody.
I'll start.
Just before you start, Levi, I don't know how the sound is working for everybody in their offices or at home or wherever you are. We're having some peculiar echoing happening here. We've had a variety of technical attempts to try and remedy it. We haven't found it perfect. I can still follow. Everybody in this room can. If you're having trouble with some echoes, I apologize. We've done everything we can at our end. Okay, Levi, you're on deck.
Great. And before Levi starts, I'll just do sort of a transition just to introduce him. Is that, as you all remember, for the past year or so, we've been having those great discussions with regards to the workshops. And at that last February workshop, we developed that dashboard to really summarize all of the projects that are ongoing in the Victoria region, whether it's service or it's infrastructure or it's safety or it's innovation. And essentially what we heard from you guys is just like, hey, this is great. Let's update our vision document to make sure it's all summarized in one place. So for the past couple months, Levi Megenber, who's our senior planner and work lead, has been leading this process to essentially consolidate all of those things that are going on in the Victoria region into one unified place. So there's a clear dashboard for you guys with regards to what's next. So I'll hand the microphone over to Levi.
Great, thank you, Matt. And also thanks to the Commission for having me here today. I've been a planner with BC Transit for about 5 years now, but recently transitioned into the Victoria system. So I'm just really looking forward to continuing to work with you all moving into the future. So as Matt discussed, I'll be presenting the draft 10-year vision document for the Commission. So I want to reiterate, this is just a high-level draft presentation at this point, and we're looking for feedback from the Commission just to ensure that this is really meeting those previously identified needs you had suggested to us through previous Commission meetings and also through our last workshop that we had. So really looking forward to your feedback there. If we could just move to the next slide. So this vision document is comprised of content from a number of different surrounding plans, both BC Transit related and also local government related throughout the region. So the BC Transit Strategic Plan, Transit Future Plan, all the local area transit plans, and then as well a lot of our local municipal and regional plans throughout the Victoria Regional Transit System geographic area. So we're pulling a lot of that stuff together. Ongoing collaboration with our local partners is a key part of this process. We've already had some preliminary discussions at this point, primarily with the CRD, and we will continue to have those discussions moving forward as this project continues to develop. Next slide would be great. So as Matt discussed, the key goal for this document is really to identify what are all the various projects, plans, and priorities in the system that are currently underway, and how are those building up to the vision that we have for the transit system here in Victoria. And so the vision statement identified in the Transit Future Plan was really to be a leader of integrated transportation solutions, connecting people and communities to a more sustainable future. So really, it's just every year we're going to update that, identify everything that we're doing in pursuit of achieving this vision. Next slide, please. So although we're not going to go into all the elements of the future document, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the key elements that we'd be looking to build into this particular plan moving forward. So of course, just some background context, both around like why are we doing this plan? Who is the Victoria Regional Transit Commission? What role does the commission play in the system here? Reestablishing that vision, going over the CRD regional growth strategy, some of the key elements that has from a land use perspective and implications for transit demand moving into the future, giving an overview of the transit system. Performance measures is a really key piece that we'll actually be speaking to a little bit more today, and how that continues to build towards the vision of the system here. And then the confirmed projects and plans, the Gantt chart, that's really the crux of this document. And as Matt alluded to, that's the piece that's going to outline all the various plans, projects, and priorities that are currently underway in the Victoria system, and give an update in terms of projected timeline moving into the future. Service expansion requests and the transit evaluation process annual transit cycle, those are all other critical elements that we'd look to build into the document as well. But really, we're primarily focusing on the performance measures and the Gantt chart for the purposes of our discussion today. Regarding the performance measures, so we sort of looking at transit planning best practices, we pulled a number of sort of key metrics that we would want to look at moving forward into the future. This isn't a fully finalized list of metrics yet. This is something that we wanted to present conceptually to the commission and just kind of confirm that in general, that's sort of the direction that you'd like to see us go. So some of those key things that we're looking to incorporate are, once again, mode share. I know that that's a really critical target that has been set through the Transit Future Plan, and then once again, revised in recent discussions with the Commission. So you'll note here that it's been updated from 12% to 15% as per previous Commission feedback. And then you'll also note that we've sort of split that down into sub-region as well, just recognizing that there's some key feasibility considerations in terms of what's feasible throughout the region in terms of mode share. Some other key things we'd be looking at: service reliability, access to transit, both just generally and as well access to frequent transit. So we can track how changes to the transit system over time are increasing access to transit and to frequent transit. Customer satisfaction, and as well trip comfort, which I think, especially given our current COVID scenario, is going to be increasingly important moving into the future. So like, how full are our buses on a regular basis is going to be increasingly crucial as we continue to move through this COVID scenario and into the future. Next slide. So here is a high-level draft of that Gantt that I was speaking to earlier. So really, this is taking that strategic dashboard that that Matt presented at the last commission workshop, and looking to sort of include that in a Gantt chart, so scheduling it out to the best of our current available information. So I recognize that a lot of this text is probably pretty small, so I might just take a moment to quickly run through some of these key things. So as Matt alluded to, we've separated that into a number of key categories, including safety, mobility innovation, transit infrastructure, and planning related projects. So, safety, introducing full driver doors on conventional buses, installing CCTV on all conventional buses, mobility innovation, low carbon fleet deployment roadmap, Victoria electric battery bus initial deployment, those initial 10 buses that will be coming into the system in the future, electronic fare collection pilot project, wayfinding strategy, and then all of the various associated transit infrastructure projects, the southbound Highway 1 bus lanes, Mackenzie interchange, bus lanes and stations, Island Highway Transit Priority, et cetera, onwards down the list there. And then as well, from a planning perspective, we've got our local area transit plans, the 3 that were completed and presented to the Commission in February. The Broadmead Cordova Bay local area transit plan, Esquimalt and View Royal local area transit plan, which are approaching completion hopefully by the fall. And then future local area plans and other planning initiatives, including the rapid bus implementation study that Matt gave an update on, and some other various associated planning projects that are currently scheduled. A couple key additional things I would want to point out with this is we have incorporated a COVID response and recovery planning piece, because we've been very focused as a planning team in the recent months with transitioning service levels to meet demand, while still managing the levels of ridership on our buses in a safe way. So that's been taking a lot of effort, both from a planning and a scheduling perspective in recent weeks and months. The other thing I'd like to point out is that most of the timelines for these various capital projects are pretty much status quo between pre and post COVID. So that's one key piece, is that at this time we're still, to the best of our ability, moving forward on those previously planned capital and infrastructure projects. But there have been some minor suggested tweaks to some of our planning project timelines. So we are suggesting potentially bumping a couple of our local area transit plans by a few months, just so that when we start those projects, we're starting to see what that post-COVID travel paradigm is going to look like, so that we're planning for the new future. And then finally, at the bottom, you'll see we've got sort of an investment trajectory that we're hoping to incorporate as in alignment with the project Gantt. Of course, we had an approved sort of expansion trajectory that we approved last June. We had further discussion with the Commission at our workshop, where we looked at revising that and increasing the rate of investment. But of course, with COVID, as Lisa alluded to at the beginning, of course, our expansion for this year has been deferred, and then we're going to have to come back to the Commission at a later date to revisit that investment trajectory in light of our post-COVID scenario, once we have a better idea of our financial situation. With that, if we could just move to the next slide. So in terms of next steps for this project, really, we're looking for any feedback from the Commission just before we finalize this document. And then we'll be looking to take that final document back to the Commission in August. And at that point, we'll have the full report attached in advance for your review, and look for approval and endorsement from the Commission at that point. With that, I will ask if anyone has any questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. So this is a bit of a work in progress, and an opportunity to say some direction to suggest to you guys before we look at this in August. This would be time to do it. So I don't know, I'm not seeing anyone up here on the chat. Kevin, hurry up.
Yeah, just if I may, just very quickly, I just noticed in the Gantt chart, it seems to go out 5 years, not 10 years. Is the Gantt chart in the final document going to be complete for the 10-year plan?
Thanks for that, Kevin. So through the chair, I think currently the Gantt chart is all our preliminarily scheduled project plans and projects. I know there's a number of other future plans, projects, and priorities that are waiting in the hopper, but we just don't know exactly where they're going to fall in terms of the start and an end date yet. So I think there's a number of those projects we're going to have to incorporate in a slightly different way. So in that full document, there will probably be a supplemental list of projects and priorities so that we're not missing anything in terms of what we already know is scheduled and stuff that is still waiting for additional information before we can actually put that into the Gantt chart itself. But great question. I think that this is draft. We will be adding, adjusting, and hopefully be able to extend that a little bit. But there will always be a little bit of that gap where there's projects that are awaiting scheduling.
If I may just through the chair follow up on that, because there are things like the bus rapid transit that we're just talking about that may include maybe even some land acquisition as opportunistic as they come available. I mean, those don't have timelines, but they might be necessary to have in this kind of chart, just so when they're brought forward to the future boards, that they're sort of aware that this is actually part of the overall plan and recognizes the necessity, but not necessarily attached to any specific timeline or project. It's just my thoughts on this, because this should be used, and I really appreciate this detailed approach to actually what we're doing, not sort of aspirational pieces alone, because I think it's really important for everybody looking at what we're doing and why to have this kind of tool available. So that's just my comments on it. Thank you so much for what you've done on this. It's great.
Thanks, Kevin.
Other members of the commission?
Yeah, I just have it's Rob. I just have one quick question. How with this 10-year plan, how do we anticipate any changes or issues when the South Vancouver Island Transportation Initiative is released from the province? Will that affect this at all, or would that just be in addition to?
Just in terms of preliminary comments to that question, great question, by the way. I think one of the benefits of this particular type of plan is that it will be updated on an annual basis. So this is really every year we're going to be reflecting our current operational scenario to the best of our ability. So there may be some impacts, some minor impacts. I know we're working very collaboratively with MOTI and communicating with them regularly. So any changes that come out of that process will likely, if it comes out in time, will be reflected here before we bring it back in August. And if we don't have that information at that point, then it'll be updated for the following year's 10-year vision document.
All right, thank you. Can you just talking about the South Vancouver Island? The last I heard was that study was going to be released in June. Do we have any sort of timelines or timetables? Has the province met at all?
Happy to speak to that. So, Rob, we've heard the same thing with regards to the timeline at some point over the summer, and that's the latest information that we have available to us as well. But to echo what Levi said, is that this document won't be written in stone, that if there are changes or adaptations that need to be made, it will be done on a regular basis. So this is going to be a living document that we would sit down with the commission members on an annual basis and show them this dashboard and say, hey, is this still applicable, or what do we need to change? Or start even back even further and say, what are the goals that we want to achieve and what do we need to adjust in order to achieve them?
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Rob, for the question. Anyone else?
Susan, it's Lisa. I've got a question as well, a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
So just following up on Kevin's question about the projects that are, and it's just impossible to see this presentation. What, like, can we make it bigger even though we're talking? Because I literally can barely read it, this slide that's up right now. But can we have, as part of this, a list of deferred projects that, or not, sorry, not deferred projects. I mean, a list of projects that haven't been started yet. Like, again, I'm squinting to see, but I don't think I see the Uptown Exchange or the third bus barn on this list. But again, like, so first question is, are they on the list? Second question is, Lisa, could you just actually email us the PowerPoint right now so we can have it? Yeah, so the large capital projects that need to be done in order to support expansion, can they be part of the plan, like, and say to be scheduled on the Gantt chart as resources or something like that? Is that part of the thinking?
Yes, Lisa, thanks for that. So as I was previously alluding to, there is a list of quite a few projects and priorities that, once again, we weren't able yet to schedule onto this Gantt chart. So we'll have to incorporate that in a list in some way, shape, or form. We have had discussions about the best way to do that. But maybe what we can do is, when we send this presentation, we can also include that list of projects that haven't yet made it onto that Gantt chart, just so that it's clear that nothing slipped through the cracks.
Okay, and then my second question is, how did we decide on 10 years? Like, where did that number come from?
I think that preliminary discussion was before my time, so I might defer to Matt on that question. Oh, Matt, you're muted.
I'm muted. I did it there. With regards to the 10-year, I think that's sort of the discussion point we'd heard from the workshops of the past couple of years. As far as transit agencies, best practice seemed to be that 10-year. But actually, to your point, Lisa, as we were doing this exercise, anything beyond 5 years just gets a little bit more and more foggy. And sort of Levi alluded to that it's hard for us to include projects that are outside that 5-year range because we don't necessarily have a date, and we just got to be cautious with regards to overcommitting. So I think that hearing the commission's feedback, maybe there's a way that we just need to be very clear with regards to, this is the range of projects that we know are happening within the next 5 years, but also here's the stuff that's perhaps beyond that we don't have specific dates but are being considered and being worked on moving forward. Does that sort of align with what your comments are?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm just wondering, like, what the decision-making process is, because the Uptown Exchange and the third bus barn need to be started before 2025. They just do. So, but do you need a motion from the commission that says put those in this Gantt chart even as tentative? Or like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, who's driving the bus, essentially.
Can I make a comment?
Go ahead, Levi T.
Yeah, Lisa, the reason being is, if we have a public document like this and we have identified project, and is that we have a plan, and that potentially puts a funding application to Canada, for example, at risk. So if we had an in-camera session, we could show a much more detailed, fulsome list of a bunch of other critical investments. This one was somewhat filtered. So should, the public realm have a significant discussion on it, that we're not inadvertently putting our potential for funding at risk. That's why this list is a little bit shy. Like, if you looked at infrastructure projects, those are all active projects.
Yeah, but I mean, like, at the city, we need to build a new swimming pool, and so we have Crystal Pool as a project that we need to get funding. Like, it's listed there. I get the intergovernmental kind of funding discussions, but I just don't know why we wouldn't have everything that we need to create transformational change in our region over the next 5 years on here somewhere. And it can be like not yet funded or something, just so we kind of, as the commission and the public, have kind of a comprehensive picture of what needs to be done.
Lisa, I would agree with you, because I think that the transit purchased the properties for the Uptown Exchange years ago, so it's not a secret to anyone that that's one of the things down the future. The third facility, also there's been a fair amount of discussion. So I think if take Lisa's direction there and ask staff to consider some way of having a document which doesn't have to be folded into this scheduled VRTC projects, but is an appendix or is some kind of a document that shows that these are still live, and there are a lot of factors involved before they can make it onto this list and be absolutely locked and ready to go.
Thank you so much, both of you. That's fantastic feedback. I think we'll take that back with the broader project team and see how we can potentially accommodate more of that information, whether it's directly on this Gantt or whether it's in another way that's very clear that these are still very pressing priorities and that we're still working to the best of our ability to move those projects forward. So let us take that away, and we'll do our best to incorporate those elements.
That's great. Lisa Trotter, you've got something you can do?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bryce. I was also going to say that I think that we can manage to make some of those additions in some way to this Gantt chart. I think that primarily this was put together for that feedback, so thank you for that feedback. And also to Mayor Helps, I am happy to email this out after. Right now, my computer is kind of being used for hosting the presentation, but as soon as we're through, I'm happy to email out this presentation and the other one that did not go out with the package. And I should note that they are live on the website right now, if someone wanted to access them later.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I can only do so many things at once. I get that. And that's good to know they're on the website, so I could just go find it that way. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
We had a sidebar discussion going here about whether these two are up on the website. They're not.
Apparently
They're not yet.
they're not. So I stand corrected. They will be put up on the website and I will email them out directly after the meeting.
Okay, thanks very much. Does that conclude the input from the commissioners? Anyone else wishing to speak? Then we can take a motion to proceed. And I'll take the assumption here that Lisa helps moves and Brett Haynes seconds.
Second.
Moving.
Those in favor, those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. We're going to have to really sharpen up my meeting skills when we actually back meeting in person. We can't make these assumptions. Now we're going to move to the infrastructure update from Levi and Kristen, and we've got after that we've got a planning update, and then I don't think number 11 and 12 will take as much time. But I definitely want us to have enough time left for the in-camera. So I'm going to target that we will be moving into camera by 11:30. So with that, I will ask for the infrastructure update number 9.
Hello, can everyone see me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so today's infrastructure updates can be broken into two parts. At our last meeting, there was an inquiry with respect to the shelter program. And so Kristen runs that program, and she's going to follow my presentation with a presentation herself. That's going to do a little bit of a deep dive onto the shelter program. So first and foremost, in the infrastructure update for our 1920 bus shelter program, we did complete 21 of the planned shelters. So that's complete for Greater Victoria region. We also have just concluded our contract for our shelter supplier. That contract had expired several months ago, and we did get a lot of interest in that, which was good, actually across North America. And it wasn't too surprising, but the incumbent vendor had the best proposal and was able to be successful in that competition. And we now have a contract in place with that vendor. And we are also pursuing federal funding to offset the cost of the shelter program with Canada under the ICIP program. So that would reduce the cost to our local partners from our traditional 50% to the shelter would now go down to 20% for the shelter for our local partners. So that we were successful in our first round of funding, and the majority of communities have benefited from that. And we're wanting to lock in a longer term amount of funding for that program so we don't have to constantly reapply. And that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we roll out the program. To Langford, we have our CNG fueling infrastructure and facility modifications project underway. I'm sure many of you have seen the CNG buses rolling around the city already. So our first key deliverable was actually getting the fuel dispensing up and running. So the project team was focused on that. We got the fuel station running in February. So that was subsequent to our last meeting. So now we can actually fuel buses on site. And then we initially deployed one bay where we could do vehicle maintenance. And now we're working on the upgrades to the remainder of the shop so that we can do vehicle maintenance in all of the maintenance bays at Langford. And those works are scheduled to be completed next month. The Handy Dirt project, key focus right now is really on community engagement. And we've had to be quite creative and innovative in terms of how we actually engage with our local stakeholders. So as you know, we established that neighborhood working group, which is comprised of various individuals, either just a home resident, stream advocacy, et cetera. And so we've been meeting with them periodically. We've had the opportunity to bring our environmental consultants on the site with the individuals that are having a high interest with respect to the creek. Things are going well there. And we've also been significantly engaged with our Indigenous communities. The Songhees and Esquimalt in particular have proven themselves to be the lead First Nations in the area that have an interest in the land in the area. And so we've been working with them, and we'll be looking for opportunities for their involvement, not just from monitoring activities, but also in the design and some of the features that are integrated into that project. So we've been drilling in on our site investigation work, dealing with our site grading issues, stormwater management, and landscaping, environmental, those aspects. We've also been doing a bit of work on the civil design. So what we want to do is we had our preferred concept before, so we're really kind of going through the process where we're confirming that that original concept plan is functional, that we are getting the best value in terms of where everything's going to be laid out on the site. And so basically we're testing all those key assumptions at this point. So I have to be frank that with COVID, we haven't been able to follow traditional engagement activities. So the community engagement aspect is taking a little bit longer than it typically would, but we're still targeting to initiate site works in the fall with building construction in the new year. Any questions on that? Okay.
Sounds like we're in good, we're glad that the attention is being put to that project that it deserves.
Yeah, thank you.
At the right time.
On the Island Highway Transit Priority Plan, so this is the section from where the highway meets the Old Island Highway in the Bureau exit there, up to Goldstream Avenue, and we've just actually achieved the 30% design completion for that project, with our plan of having our issue for construction documents ready this summer. And once we get those, it will also include a new funding estimate for the improvements. We'll bring that information back to the Commission and the Ministry of Transportation for approval this fall. And then we expect that construction will start early 2021, assuming that we have support to proceed with the project. And this is also another element that is integrated into the strategy, which is also targeted for fall completion. I don't know how much we've discussed the enhancements for the University of Victoria, but as many of you know, a few years ago, we created half of the transit exchange there, so the south half of it. And this project, in collaboration with UVic, is looking at the north half. So this is where the bookstore side is what we want to do is do a bit of a redesign, increase the bus capacity, create layover spaces for operators. And we have a preferred concept with University of Victoria. We are pulling together a project agreement with them. Once we get that, we would then be going forward for our approvals, put together a business case, and we'd also be looking to secure federal funding for that project as well. And UVic, I believe, we're still in negotiations on the agreement side, but they would allow us to occupy the site at nominal cost, and they may even be willing to provide a financial contribution towards the project, which would be wonderful. Any questions on that one?
There's not. Oh, someone have a question? No, carry on.
Okay. Linked in with our earlier conversations is we've also initiated our facility master plan process. So this is our 25-year vision for facilities. And so we have several key objectives with this document. It's going to be a fulsome document that isn't just going to look at one operation site. It's going to look at all of our existing infrastructure as well as our future needs. So what we want to do first and foremost is we wanted to review our immediate short-term vehicle maintenance and bus storage challenges. And what we want to do is ensure that we are maximizing our existing asset base. So one of the objectives here is that we know it's going to take a number of years to build our new Victoria 3rd facility. So what we wanted to do is ensure that we have enough capacity to allow transit growth in the interim, And so that's what that immediate deliverable is. And we're expecting to have that deliverable later this summer. And I'm planning to incorporate the findings with that into our capital planning process for projects for next year. And then supporting that is we're also having the consultants look at what can we do to modernize the shops at Victoria and in Langford so that we can improve our efficiency at those locations. And so that, again, that will then support expanded transit fleets. In addition to that, our moving into the longer term view is we are integrating all of our low carbon strategies into that master planning process. So that would help inform how do we roll out our full battery electric program here in Victoria? What would be the staged investments? Would it be, for example, maybe we do more investments at our Victoria garage to enable more buses over the 10? Would it be doing more investment for Handy Dart so that we could have a fully electric fleet earlier than originally contemplated, as well as Victoria 3rd and possibly a Victoria 4th facility? So we're looking at all of those growth scenarios. COVID's thrown us a little bit of curveball, but we're just looking at that as more of a pause versus we're changing our growth pattern. So we trust that we will be able to, the necessary protocols, procedures to recover our lost ridership based on COVID. And as we move into the kind of new normal, we expect that as the region continues to grow, so will transit. So we're not taking the foot off the pedal, so to speak. We're assuming that, yeah, there's a blip now, but we will recover at some point. And once we hit those triggers, that will be the investment decisions so that we want to have all of that. So the master plan is really going to provide us with, when your fleet hits X, you need to make a decision to proceed with a particular project so that you have that project in place before you kind of hit a constraint wall. We're out on the master plan. In addition to that, we also have our West Shore Transit Priority Action Plan. So this is the section beyond beyond Gold Street Avenue, moving out towards Metchosin, for example. And so in the report there, we tried to highlight a few of the key elements that we're looking at. I'm just going to say, long story short, is we've identified improvements that we believe we can generate 20% travel times through that portion of the corridor. It will be integrated into our rapid bus strategy. We are also going to be doing our consultations with our local governments, specifically in the area, getting sort of their endorsement before we bring the final report back to the commission for its review and hopeful support of that project to be accepted. And once we have that, then we can determine which priorities we're actually going to put in the plan and what ones we want to implement. On the South Island Transportation Plan, we do expect to see a few of these key elements in here. What I did highlight are known projects that the ministry is working on. So since our last meeting, obviously everyone is aware that the southbound bus lane between Tillicum and Cloverdale has been opened. Mackenzie Interchange will also have bus lanes in it as well as transit stations. And we've been told that will be completed in the fall of 2020. And then also out near towards Souk is the Highway 14 realignment project. And as part of that, there's the park and ride that's going to be constructed near Connie Road there. And so we'll have, bus pullouts on the highway. There'll be bus stops as well. And that project's supposed to start this fiscal year. And then in addition to the South Island plan, we've also been apprised that the ministry is still doing more detailed planning work on the Highway 1 Douglas Street corridor. So this would be from, let's say, the uptown area, continuing through all the way through the corridor to the West Shore, basically where the off-ramp is at View Royal there. So possibly extending the bus lanes from the Mackenzie Interchange outbound further out. And then we also know that there is some planning work happening out on Highway 17 on the peninsula for some transit priority treatments at a couple key intersections along that corridor as well. So we expect that we'll see these things highlighted likely through the South Island plan once it's released. So that's the summary of the infrastructure update this time around. Any specific?
A lot happening there. Any questions on any of the specifics that have been raised here? Now, Levi, Kristen was, oh, Kevin, Kevin? Yeah, go ahead.
Just to thank you through you, Chair. Just a real quick question on the bus shelters. I know I've always liked the idea of being able to just hang a couple of 2 to 4 bikes on the side of a bus shelter just to allow people to kind of make that last mile trip easily to the bus shops. And I noticed that none of those, there was a separate large covered bike shelter in showing there as one of the options. But is there any way of adding a small scale, bike lockups at just regular bus shelters so that people can ride to those bus shelters and then take the buses in from there?
The quick answer to that's yes. Should there be room working with the staff? I do know that a lot of times where our shelters are located, we've got constrained road alignments, but I'd say anything's possible. And with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Kristen.
Thanks, Levi. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good morning, everyone. As Levi mentioned, my name is Kristen McCarricker, and I am the project manager for the bus stop program, or better known as the shelter program. Today, I'll just be taking you through a high-level overview of what the program is and highlighting some of the new options that are now available. So next slide, please. Bus stops are the Bus stops are the first touch point that a rider encounters with the transit system, and we wanted to help our partners find a way to make that a more enjoyable experience. This program provides access to provincial and more recently federal funding to help make bus stop upgrades more affordable for our local government partners. The program helps to brand and standardize the local bus stops across the province, so no matter where the customer is in BC, they'll know where to get on the bus. The program has funded more than 500 installations across the province since 2010, with more than 300 of those in the Victoria region. We also coordinate the program with the province's Minor Betterments Program, which provides funding for projects on ministry-owned lands. So this program funds projects up to $100,000 and is well-funded, increasing the likelihood of its approval. So any shelter applications that we receive for bus stops along the ministry right-of-way are typically denied, and the partner is advised to reach out to the ministry. The added benefit of their program is that costs related to road or pedestrian infrastructure upgrades are covered, whereas they are not with BC Transit's program. Next slide, please. We offer around 13 customizable shelter designs through our program, and you can see images of our most popular types on the slide there. Cantilevered shelters are popular for bus stops in constrained areas, and the glass harsh weather design is popular in our northern regions, which provides extra protection from the elements. And shelter costs can range from a little bit over $2,000 to about $100,000 for those rapid bus stations that Matt mentioned earlier. However, through the program, the average cost across the province and in Victoria is in the low to mid $20,000 range. And we do see a higher cost in Victoria, which we attribute to the higher ridership and the more complex infrastructure. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? In 2010, we did go out to the market with a need and piloted the program in the Victoria region with the installation of about 30 shelters. So using municipal feedback, the designs were further refined and options were added, and then the standard was set. Things such as bench design, wall panel design, and material, lighting, and affordability have been refined over the last 10 years. And as Levi also mentioned, in January of this year, we went out to the marketplace again to establish a new contract using the same standard designs that have been implemented across the province. We asked for an expanded set of options, allowing our local governments to ensure that the shelters met the unique needs of their communities. So let's dive into those a little bit. Next slide, please. So popular options that we continue to offer include things like solar or grid-powered lighting, advertising panels, and vandal-resistant metal or glass walls. Expanded options include things like green roofs, ID pole-mounted seats, which are now the most affordable bus stop upgrades, USB charging ports, and bike lockers. And you see some of our garbage cans available there as well. Next slide. So how does a municipality get their hands on a shelter? Our shelter brochure, which is available on our website, outlines that process in detail. And here you can just see a small snippet of the process, which is essentially saying that our local partners drive the bus. BC Transit validates the requests that we receive from staff at each of the 13 municipalities across the region. And we evaluate them against ridership data, future service plans, and coordination with any other road projects that we've been made aware of. We sign an agreement and then we place the order. Next slide, please. We work with staff at each municipality and the contractor to make sure that the installation goes as smoothly as possible. And we are currently working on some other tools for staff to help make this process easier to understand and as affordable as possible. And there are a couple other notes that I do want to highlight. The first is that locations that are currently under contract by others really do inhibit BC Transit's ability to brand major corridors. For example, the Pattison contract for shelters on Douglas Street does not allow for BC Transit branded shelters to be placed. And another good piece of information I do want to leave you with relates to those 30 pilot shelters. Reviews indicate that they're really only at midlife right now, and we are starting to look at ways to implement a future replacement program. So stay tuned for more information on that. So here's where you can reach me if you have any questions about the program in the future, or you can reach out to Lisa Trotter. I'd like to thank you for having me today, and I would like to hand over to Chair Bryce for any questions.
Thanks for that, Kristen. And I don't know if the audio has been a problem out there with everyone else. For that presentation, you soldiered through it very well. We were getting quite a bit of feedback, and it's nothing to do with what was happening at your end. So thanks for that. Rather than taking time to get into the bus shelters now, I'm going to signal because it's 11:15. I want to make sure we've got 15 minutes here planning and still get to our camera. I'll take a motion and I'll be presumptuous and suggest that Mayor Phelps and Mayor Haynes would second it. Receiving that last information from the ground.
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Seth, you're on deck.
Thank you so much, Chair Bryce. The planning team has been extremely busy over the last few months, as I'm sure you can imagine, with a lot of work to look at what's happening with our ridership, where it's going, where it's staying the most stable and resilient. And so to start off the planning update, I have the recent service changes and the upcoming fall service change in spring 2020. We had an April 6th service change, but this is 3 weeks after basically it was encouraged from the province to not travel. So we saw a 75% drop in ridership. So we had a bit of a canned schedule and we removed some trips at the last minute. It was also necessitated by a number of operators, high volume of sick calls where people sometimes will go to work sick. They decided not to in those early days of COVID, especially, and hopefully continue to not to. But the summer schedule, we were able to have a slightly more nuanced approach. We continued the discontinuation of late night service, but we used a lot of analysis to see where we needed service and where we could drop service a little bit. We didn't add the typical summer service expansion to Bouchard, the Swartz Bay Ferry and Thetis, so those was continued on from the spring, and where we saw that there wasn't need for school trips because UVic, Camosun, and the K-12 school system is not in session, we removed a few of those trips. Moving into fall, we recently completed the fall 2020 schedules, and they will be going to operations for driver sign up in the next few weeks. And we really applied a lot of analysis and a lot of lessons that we've learned over the last few months from COVID, and looking at our ridership, looking at data, looking at best practices of transit systems across North America and the world, and trying to accurately scale our transit service so that people don't have pass ups, so that we can respect that appropriate capacity so people are comfortable on the bus, and also so that we're not running too many empty buses. Looking at our local area transit plans, we recently completed in February of this year, just before COVID came to us, the Esquimalt to View Royal and Broadmead Cordova Bay local area transit plans. They are currently in the drafting stage, so they're being written and analyzed and working on presentation to the Commission for your August meeting. Finally, I'll turn your attention to the performance report, which is starts off with system performance report and moves to a route performance report for the winter 2020 service period, which is January 6th to April 5th. So it includes 3 of those weeks were impacted by COVID reductions in travel, which is about 21% of the service period, which does contribute to a modest decline. It shows up sometimes a little bit, but not too much. It is a decline year over year in some of the metrics, but not too bad considering the scale of what we've seen. We overall continue to see really strong system performance, and this information is supporting us in continuing to add and remove trips to better manage those capacity and investment, find that best balance. With that, I'll hand it back to the chair, and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Seth. Commission members, any questions or clarification on that report? Not hearing anyone. I will thank you for that, Seth, and ask Mayor's help and Haynes to move and second the motion.
So moved.
Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Kevin, I see you're back for the ATAC minutes. Commission, we just received these for information, but if you have any questions about any item on that, Kevin is here for that discussion. Was there anything you needed to raise to our attention, Kevin?
No, I think the minutes are fairly self-explanatory, but I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you. Your pleasure, Commission. Motion to receive for information.
Moved.
Seconder? Ask Rob. Will you second that, Rob?
Sure. I'll second.
Discussion? Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have 3 pieces of correspondence. You've had a chance to look at those. There's no action contemplated at this time. And unless I hear otherwise, I'll look for a motion to receive for information.
So moved.
Wait a seconder. Rob, could you second that?
Second.
Second, so moved by Rob. Discussion? Hearing none. Call the question. Those in favor? Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes. We will now move. Now that concludes the open portion of this meeting. We're going to have to take a moment to ensure that